All right, Brooke. Brookie? Ready? Baby?
Yes, ready. All right, this is not the one you need? Okay, then take this.
All right. So here we go. You got it?
All right,
So it's just going.
Just going right now.
Just going
We're
right
on.
now. We're on. All right. Hi, welcome everybody to In Air's Kitchen. We are going to do potato soup and soda bread. I think this might be our 16th episode. So we had a few days for birthdays where we didn't do the show, but it's almost 3 weeks of shows now. And we're going to, these are still pretty straightforward recipes, and I think they should be using things that people have in their pantry, I'm hoping. But we are going to start doing a little bit more complex techniques. So if this is the first show you've watched, you may want to go back to one of those older shows because we're trying to sort of slowly build up some of the skills and some of the approaches that are necessary. You can join Vi if you want. Yeah, you can. We're making soda bread. We're going to do it two ways. We're going to do it one way that Richard gave me an idea for, which will be fun, an experiment. So we're going to do potato soup today, and we're going to do Irish soda bread. And these things are a classic combination. One of my favorite potato soups is potato leek soup, and I don't have any leeks. So instead today we're going to use chives, and that'll be delicious. There are a lot of different potato soups. We used to make a roasted garlic potato soup. It was delicious. You can make a cheesy potato soup. So a lot of different choices. But today we're going to do one with chives. And we're going to make soda bread, and we're going to make it in two different ways. I've been talking to Richard Bordone a lot lately because we're working on some really fun bread recipes that we're hoping to share with you guys in the coming weeks. And he runs a bakery called Berkshire Bakery, and is one of the experts in the world at making whole wheat, naturally leavened breads. So I've been learning a lot from him. It's really fun. But one of the things we're working on is different sourdoughs and alternatives to keeping a starter going. Richard doesn't really love the whole feeding your starter thing. And if you make a big batch of flour and water and you let it sit long enough, it becomes what Richard calls a low gluten, low carbohydrate, high protein, well, he doesn't call it this, but I'll call it like a goo. And he's told me that he's kept this in his kitchen for like a year and a half at times. So this is like got a nice sour smell. This is flour and water that's been sitting in my kitchen now for maybe 3 weeks or so. And it's something we could use. We could refresh that and use it as a starter to make bread. But you could also use it to make something sort of like injera, like a stovetop bread, which is probably a very old-fashioned kind of bread. Maybe we'll even have time to do one of those today. And we could also use it to make a soda bread. So Richard had a little theory he shared with me that he wonders whether some of the early soda breads were actually just using really sour dough. And so we're gonna give that a try today. So that'll be in addition to the the soda bread that I know how to make. So we'll do both different kinds. All right. So the ingredients that we need today, I'm going to go through the ingredients you're going to need for potato soup, and I'm going to go through the ingredients that you're going to need to make the soda bread. For potato soup, hey Blue, would you grab me some bay leaves in the drawer there? You said, yeah, they're in like a little packing sort of. They're not in See it right there? Yep, that's it. All right, so I left out that ingredient. But now to go through potato soup, so you're going to want some sort of fat. I'm going to use this Earth Balance shortening, so this is like a vegan alternative to butter. But you could do this with real butter, you could do this with olive oil, you could do this with another kind of oil. You're going to need something to cook the onions in, and it is going to impart a little flavor in the final soup, so you can pick whatever you want there. You're going to need onions. We're going to do 1 large onion here. You're going to need potatoes. And I'm lucky enough to have some organic potatoes that were grown in Vermont, which is really awesome. You should use whatever potatoes you have at home. And if you don't have potatoes, next time you buy them, there are a lot of producers in New England who are growing potatoes now. It didn't used to be the case even 10 years ago, but it's really wonderful opportunity we have. And I'd say if you can use your dollars to support what they're doing, it's an awesome thing. We'll give some links for places to buy potatoes later. Here I have 2 different things I washed together. I've got parsley stalks, so we're going to use some parsley in the soup. And I also have some kale. We're going to make a kale version of this soup. You don't have to, if you don't have the kale, it's not necessary, but I think it'll be yummy in there. I also have some herbs. I have dried herbs. So I have some Greek oregano, which is similar to thyme, and I have some bay leaves. I would probably use thyme if I had it, but I'm all out of thyme. So part of what we're doing in the show is getting comfortable with substitutions because a lot of us are stuck at home and running out of certain things. But these will all work really well together, and this will be a harmonious recipe. So these are the ingredients you're going to need to make potato soup. Let me go through the ingredients we're going to need to make soda bread. So the most simple soda bread, we're going to post a recipe to make matzah at home, and we have an interview with Barry Dollinger, who's a rabbi who works to Kosher Clover, and he's telling me about matzah. And matzah is like not really meant to taste great. The original Irish soda bread, I think, may have been a little bit in that same vein. I think it was about substance and filling yourself up. So some of the additions, we're going to add raisins to this today, but that's a more recent addition. I think a lot of traditional soda breads that were made in the 1800s probably did not have raisins in them. People put caraway seeds in them sometimes. And some soda breads will have fat in them, butter or something like that, but I think a lot of those really basic soda breads wouldn't even have that. So we're going to make a really simple soda bread today. We're going to use some flour. We're going to use some milk. Really, I would want buttermilk for this recipe, but I'm going to substitute. I'm going to use a little bit of milk and a little bit of vinegar, and I'll show you how to do that. We're going to use some salt, and we're going to use some baking soda, and that's all that we need. So it's a very, very simple recipe. If we had buttermilk, you'd really just be seeing buttermilk, flour, soda, and salt in it. So it's a very, very simple recipe. And then over here I've got my sort of passed over starter that I'm going to use to make an experimental soda. And maybe we'll make a flatbread with that too. So that's what we have to get started here. I'm going to turn the oven on to 450, so a nice hot oven, and that'll get ready for the bread in there. When Irish soda breads were made, sometimes these were breads that were cooked on a fireplace or on a rock, and one of the ways these would have been cooked in the past would be in cast iron, like this. So we're going to try making a soda bread that way, and I'm going to make the second soda bread. I'm going to make just on this is a simple aluminum pizza pan, about as cheap as you can get for a cooking pan, and I'll make both of these so you can see the difference and what the options are. But you could really do it either way. All right, should we get started?
Yeah.
So let's see, I need blue. We're gonna get started with the soup. I'm gonna need some chives or green onions. Can you get like a nice little bunch? Don't need a ton, but like a little a handful?
Yeah.
Thanks, bud. Do you know where that black cutting board is? It's like, oh, there it is. Okay, so my onion cutting board. Hey, Vi.
Hi.
How you doing? You want to help a little bit?
Sure.
Cool. You can help me make the soda bread too. That's a fun one. So we're gonna cut the onion for the soup. I cut the onion pretty quickly, so I'm gonna get the pot hot first. Then put some heat under that, because we want that all ready to be hot before we put the onion in. And I've got a compost bowl here. Put it aside so you can see what I'm doing. We've cut a few onions on the show, but I'll go through it every time. first thing is I'm going to use a claw, and what that is put your fingertips down and come forward so that your blade is on your knuckles instead of on your tips of your fingers. So I'm using claw there. If you'll notice, my blade can't hit my fingertips, which is great. I'm going to come along the root end of the onion, and then I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to come along the other end of the onion, and you can see some of this onion's gone bad. This time of year, you may find that with some of your onions because these were picked a while ago. We're not going to let that deter us. We're going to go ahead and cut through it, and then lo and behold, we're going to find that it's only bad to a certain area. Onions have all these layers of protection. So I'm just going to hack that part. Now the part of the onion that's gone bad, it smells bad, it tastes awful. We definitely don't want it in the food. But if you see, we can just hack it off and use the rest of the onion. Nothing's wrong with the rest of this onion. Now I'm going to use this opportunity, since the onion's halved, to go ahead and peel the skin off the onion. All right. Three times as much as that?
There's not anymore.
You were having trouble finding. Did you go to the garden?
Oh, that
Go look in the
part.
front garden.
Oh, I want
You were
to
looking in
go.
the back garden. Yeah, the chives are just getting started on the herb garden, but in the front garden, I think you'll find a lot. So I'm like tempted to bring Richard on, but I don't think that'd be fair to him because I didn't warn him he would be on the live broadcast with how many people do we have watching right now, Blue?
17.
Yeah, with 17 people. I'm making a little bit of a joke on my own expense. We have had we've gotten to places where we have a really awesome audience on here, like 100 or so people. But I think that it's always back and forth, and maybe people will start gathering up as the show goes on. So I'm putting a little oil in this pan because it's getting hot now. And everything looks okay over there, Blue? When Blue gets back, he's going to be the question man again. So if anybody's got questions.
There's some questions going.
There are already questions coming? Awesome. All right.
So.
Okay. So I'm going to put a nice spoon of my fake vegan butter in. So I've got the butter, I've got vegan butter, and I've got oil in here together. And I'm going to let this get to the place where it's melted, but I don't want to let it burn. And so it's getting close. And when these onions go in, I want to hear a sizzling sound. One of the main issues people have cooking is not heating up the pan enough. If you put things into a cold pan, they'll stick to the pan, and it's sort of a hassle, and they won't cook right. So that sounds good to me, and I'm just going to give those a little roll in that fat. So those onions are building some flavor now. At Clover, we used to do a lot of potato soup. So in the earlier days, we used to change our soups out every day. And when we did that, once or twice a week, we'd always bring in a potato soup. So there were a lot of potato soups we did. We had different recipes. It was a lot of fun. Oh, awesome, Blue. Look at that. All right. And there's different styles of potato soups. A lot of the potato soups we did at Clover, not all of them, but a lot of them were pureed soups. The soup we're going to do today is not going to be pureed. It's going to be more brothy. And I would say always when we made the potato soup at Clover, we'd use a really nice vegetable stock that we made in-house. I don't have vegetable stock now. I mentioned on past episodes. It's really because my refrigerator is too full. And if I make up some vegetable stock, I just don't have room for it. So I've been operating without vegetable stock right now. I love vegetable stock. If I had the luxury of it, I would bring it into this. But we're going to make a really flavorful soup today, just using water as our base point.
There's a question.
Yeah.
Okay, someone asked, do you have any suggestions for farms that sell their veggies now that the restaurants are on pause? Maybe.
Yes. So one of the big goals we've had with this show is to direct some of your dollars towards some of the wonderful farmers that used to support Clover and that we could support through selling sandwiches. And we just can't do that anymore, but the farmers still need support. And so there are some really great places to buy things. What we've done to now is send out an email message with these links. because there's not really a good way to put the links on YouTube. So we've sent out an email message with these links leading up to the shows. If you haven't been getting that, you can go to Clover's website and sign up for the email and you'll start getting that. I'm also working on a website which should be up really soon, maybe in the next couple days, which will host all these videos and have really nice usable links to get to all that. So hang in there. In the meantime, go to Clover's website and sign up for the email list. Let's get back to this soup. So these onions are starting to get translucent, which is what I want them to do. I'm going to get that light on brighter. So you can see some of these onions I can sort of start to see through, not all of them. And that's what I mean by translucent. So I'm okay with a little bit of color on these onions, but I don't want to go too far with the color. I definitely want to get them pretty translucent. That's like a nice sweet stage for the onion. Vi, could you grab some garlic? I think there should be a clove over there. All right, and so next we're going to get our potatoes ready. We're going to get our garlic ready, our potatoes ready. These green onions are pretty delicate, so we're going to add those in at the end. We're not going to add them in now. This is awesome. Thank you. All right, so Violet just brought me some garlic. This is a great way to open garlic. You want to obviously be careful you don't get your hand on the sharpness of that blade. All right, so this is... I've been occupied with trying to get the website together, which I'm just about there. But once I get that in place, I'm going to go back to setting up interviews with people. It takes a good amount of energy to put those up, but I think it's a lot of fun. So we'll get a bunch of interviews going again with different folks. We'll bring Richard on the show. We're going to do some breads pretty soon, which will be really fun. But we'll bring some other folks on the show as well. We'll bring farmers on the show, we'll bring distributors on the show, we'll bring chefs and cooks on the show. All right. If you haven't watched these already, so the previous episodes featured some of my favorite people. We had Michael Doctor on one of the earlier shows, on Quick Pickles. We had George Howell on a show about coffee. We had Crescent Dragon Wagon, one of my favorite cookbook authors, on an earlier episode, which was a whole lot of fun. So you can go back and check those out if you're interested. Can you grab me the old scissors there, Vi?
Yep.
So I'm going to turn the temperature down just a little bit on the soup right now. And thank you for that, Violet. Now we're just going to try to cut that. There we go. So I have a little farm stand just down the road that has a 24-hour sort of self-serve function, and it's sort of like you just pick the stuff out yourself, which is pretty cool. So I was able to pick these potatoes up there because I was running low on potatoes in my fridge. But I will post some really good links. I think probably for most people watching this, if you don't have a little farm stand you can walk to, it might be easiest for you to do some form of a mail order, and there's a lot of good options for that. Here we go. So we have some beautiful potatoes. We're going to bring those in. And as I said, I'm making a potato soup that's going to be more brothy. You can see the size that I made these potatoes. They're a little bit on the large side. What I'm expecting is I'm going to cook them long enough that they start to break down a little bit. So the potatoes you're going to be eating are going to be a little smaller than these. And they're going to release some of the starch and everything else, which is going to create a nice thick broth. So I deliberately kept these a little bit on the large side. And now let's go ahead and add a couple bay leaves. I'm going to add 3 bay leaves in there. And a thyme would be really great. We're using a little bit of Greek oregano, which is a relative of thyme. And now I'm going to bring the temperature up again. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add water to cover this all up. But what I want to do with the water is I want to get it high enough that I'm not going to worry about this burning, because I'm going to let this boil. I'm going to let this come up to a high temperature, and I'm going to cook this as quickly as I can, because I'm hoping this might be done or close to done right when we pull the soda bread out, which is going to be about 25 minutes from now. So I'm going to put enough water on there I don't have to worry about it burning. And I'm expecting a good amount of this is going to come off. And this liquid, you can see right now, it's very watery. But as it cooks, it's going to gain some viscosity. And we'll come back to that in a little bit. So that's just coming up to temperature right now. All right, so now we're going to get started on the traditional Irish soda bread. And I have Irish ancestors. My grandmother's side, on my dad's side, her name was Barrett, and I also have some Irish blood on my mom's side too. But I don't think any of my families had like too much of an Irish tradition when I was a kid. We did celebrate St. Patrick's Day, and this is probably when I'd have soda bread as a kid. I always really liked soda bread a lot. The fun thing is it's a really, really quick one to make. It's really a great option for making at home. And you don't need a lot of complicated ingredients to pull it off. So, as I said, some of the recipes are a little fancier than others. We're going to make a soda bread that's sort of maybe a more original, like simplified soda bread. And we're going to use a soft flour. Now, you could use all-purpose flour if you wanted. There wouldn't be anything wrong with that. Today, though, we're going to use... I'm going to take this opportunity to teach you a little bit about some different kinds of flour, which is pretty fun. So, here I have rye berries, and here I have hard red winter wheat. So this is, it's actually harder if you put it in your teeth. It's harder to break, but it has more gluten in it. So it's more appropriate for a bread flour. And over here, I have a soft white winter wheat. And this is softer if you put it between your teeth. But it also has less gluten in it. And this soft wheat is what would be used for a pastry flour or something like that. So it's much more appropriate for that. Do you want to try putting it between your teeth? You can try that. Yeah, this one, you can sort of crush it. It's like really soft in your mouth. Just crush it between your teeth, and then I'll give you one of the hard red ones, and you can try that. It's way harder. So I'm going to do 3 cups of this, but if you don't have this, you can just use all-purpose flour, or you can use whole wheat flour. It's going to be loud for a minute. Sorry about that. Of white flour, just to bring a little bit of lightness to it. And then we're going to use 1½ teaspoons of baking soda. So it's 1. Make sure the baking soda is mixed in. Another way to do that would have been to run this through a sifter or something like that. I have 1 teaspoon of salt. I know that's loud right now, so this is salt we're using here. Some milk here. And I'm going to 1 teaspoon of apple cider vinegar. And again, sorry about the noise. I know it's loud. And I've been back and forth on whether we should do this before the show starts or not. And I hope it doesn't take away from how enjoyable it is to watch the show. But I am trying to keep things real time. And this is what we would do when we were making this at home. So we'd set this guy going and we'd wait a few minutes for it to finish. How's that looking? Almost done, huh? So we want to put 3 cups of this soft flour in. 2. So this is like a fresh ground pastry flour, basically. All right. And that would be a really great choice if we were making biscuits. It's a great choice for this kind of bread because we're not trying to get a really tough glutinous bread here. We're trying to get something that's more like a biscuit, really. So we've got in here 1 teaspoon of salt. We have 1½ teaspoons of baking soda, not baking powder, baking soda. Soda. And we have 1 cup of all-purpose flour, 3 cups of soft white flour, and I'll post all this recipe afterwards. We're going to do raisins in this, and I was reading a little bit about old-fashioned soda breads. I think this past St. Patrick's Day, and they were saying that most of them would not have had raisins in them, and caraway seeds. That those are newer additions. This time we're gonna do it anyway. Yes, sweetie?
There's a question.
Violet's got a question for us.
If we were using buttermilk, what should be the quantity?
Yeah, so you'd use a little less than this. This is two cups. And if you're using buttermilk, I would use maybe 1 3/4. Sorry, I would use a little bit more than this. I would use like maybe just a little bit more than the 2 cups worth. And actually, you can add it in and sort of judge the consistency for yourself. And you know what? This is looking too wet to me, and I know the reason. It's because that fluffy flour that just came out is a lot less dense. So I was using the recipe that has cups, but I've actually put too little in. So I'm going to go ahead and just add more flour into this to get this to a little bit thicker consistency. I could use more fresh flour, but I just don't want to put the noise on for you guys again. But that's more the consistency I'm aiming for. So do you all see that? That looks pretty good to me. So it's still somewhat sticky, but it's not as wet as it was. And the difference is just, you can see, I had to use about a little less than ½ cup of flour to get that to the right spot. And that was just because the flour I put in before was really fluffy, so I probably didn't get as much as I thought I was in there. All right. And so I'm going to put a little bit of flour out, and I'm now going to take this out of here, and I'm going to turn it on to this. This part looked like fun, Violet. Do you want to try this?
Maybe.
Sure. Your hands clean? Get your hands nice and clean, sweetie. So it's a little bit of a wet dough, and that's fine with me. So you can see how that looks in my hands. And I'm just kneading it gently, but I don't want to knead it too much. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is I don't want to develop too much gluten, really. And the second reason for this is I don't want this to lose all the bubbles that are being created with the reaction of the baking soda. And when you make quick breads, which are breads that use baking soda or baking powder in order to create bubbles, those breads, they just create the bubbles exactly when that reaction happens. And that's it. So the bubbles don't keep coming. So if we play with this too much, we're going to make it into a bread that is not going to be as fluffy as we'd like. So I'm going to take this around, and I've kneaded it just gently a little bit and not too much. And now, this is a fun part, Violet. We're going to make a cross on the top of it. Does that look like a fun thing to do?
Yeah.
All right, why don't you take this, and why don't you go ahead. We'll use the fat side of it and just push a line down. Go ahead. Okay, we'll put a little bit of flour on that so it doesn't stick. There you go. Try it. Now just push it down, and then up. Okay, and now let's turn it the other way. Down and then up. All right. So this is a traditional shape for this bread. Basically makes it into 4 pieces that you can break apart. I don't know the history of that, but I know that's usually how this is made. It's how I've had it before. And now this bread, what we're going to do with this one is we're going to cook this one. I'm just going to lift that up here, and I'm going to bring it right into this this pot. It's a Dutch oven, basically, and I'm going to cover that up. And we're going to pop that in the oven. All right. And we may need to take that guy out. Okay. So that's in there cooking now. And the way we did this, I didn't preheat that Dutch oven. So it's actually going to take a few minutes before that oven itself heats up, and then it'll start to cook the bread. So the oven's very, very hot, but the temperature is going to get to the bread, but not quite as fast. And all right, so that one's cooking. And I've got a little flour on myself, don't I? So while that one's cooking, let's go ahead and we'll make the second one. This is going to be the experimental one. So what we're going to do here, and I haven't done this before, I was just curious to try it out, and I thought this might be a fun opportunity to do it. I'm not even going to bother changing this out. So what this is flour and water that's been sitting in my kitchen at room temperature for about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that. And we're going to go ahead and use, we'll use a good amount of it. I think that's probably good. Now you can see it's sort of a pasty consistency. It also has some bubbles in it. It has a lot of sour smell. It smells really good. It smells like yeasty, sort of sour and yeasty smell. And it's at this point most of the carbohydrates and protein have been broken down. The protein hasn't disappeared, but most of the protein's gone from the form of gluten into being the bodies of bacteria. Not all of it, but a lot of it. You can see there's no stringiness to it right now. There's none of that that we would get with bread. Now I'm going to add to this a little bit of my all-purpose flour, and that's just so I can form something, because right now it's pretty goopy. And we're going to add to this a bit of baking soda, and we're going to add to this some salt. Okay. And should we add some butter to this, or just do it like this, guys?
We could add some.
We'll just do it like this? Let's try it like this. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to mix this all together. And so in this case, the thing that's going to activate that baking soda is going to be the sourness of that dough. In the last case, we used the vinegar, and if we'd had buttermilk, we would have used the buttermilk. And this one, we're not going to do raisins on. We're going to do this one without. Partly because I have no idea how this will turn out, and I want to save my raisin supply. We don't have that many raisins, right? Okay, so I'm just going to shape this very, very simply. And I'm expecting that the baking soda at this point is going to be reacting with the sourness in that dough, and it's going to be creating some bubbles, which I think I can even see some evidence of already, which is great. And we're going to go ahead and put this on a simple pizza tray. So this is, if you don't have the Dutch oven, this is a fine way to make soda bread. And we're going to go ahead. Do you want to do it this time, Blue? You're going to push it down in the center. Get a little flour on there so it doesn't stick. Go ahead, push it down all the way. Keep going, keep going. That's good. Nice job. Now, a little flour on it and do it the other side. You got it. Push it down, push it down, push it down. There you go. Perfect. All right, so we've crossed the bread, and we're going to put this in the oven as well. That one's not going to have raisins in it. The other one does. All right, so that's our experimental bread. We're curious how that will work. The first one we made, I'm confident in. The second one was inspired by a conversation I was having with Richard Bourdon. He was thinking that some of these really sour, spent doughs were used in early soda breads, early variants of that. It should be fun to try out and see how that turns out. While we're on the subject of bread, let's try some of those flatbreads. So I have some more of this stuff, I think. Yep, I have a little bit more of this. This is the same thing, just a little bit more of this. So very old dough. It's like an overdone starter. And when I was making that starter, I took 50% fresh wheat that hadn't been filtered anyway, and then I took 50% bread flour, and I combined those with water and salt. Actually, probably no salt in that case, probably just water. And I used like a 85% hydration. That means that's like a baker's hydration. So it's actually like 43% hydration, as like an engineer would say. But what it means is if I was doing 1,000 grams of that flour mix, so 500 grams of whole wheat, 500 grams of white, then I would do 800 grams of water. And so this is the result of that, and this has been sitting now for a while. And if I wanted to make bread tomorrow, sourdough bread, what I would do is I'd take this and, do you want to taste a little bit of it?
Sure.
Connie, you want to taste a little bit of it? So, it's got like a really strong flavor. What do you think? You making a face? It's puckery, isn't it? It's like very sour.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very sour. Sort of like lemony sour, isn't it? Could we substitute this for lemon in the next time we make our hummus?
I think so.
It's very lemony and has like a little bit of a sweetness to it, actually. And yeah, it's a little bit of sweetness in there. It's yum. I don't think it tastes really good. So what I've done here is I put some of that in a bowl, and this is the Richard inspired episode. He's going to be very excited. He and I have been talking about bread and making very basic bread at home. The recipe we're really working hard on is to try to make a spontaneously fermented loaf. So this would be a bread that you make by starting out mixing water and flour, and then several days later you just bake it. And there's some kneading that goes on in between, but it would be a naturally leavened bread that you're not using, you're not having to create a traditional starter to make. So we've been back and forth trying to develop that recipe, and we've had some really fun results, but I'm not getting consistency with different flours, so I'm still working on it with him. But in that process, I've been learning a lot from Richard, and one of the things he's taught me about is this, which is nothing I've never played with before. So this is a new territory for me. And what I'm going to do here is I'm adding water to this, and there's going to be bubbles in there from all those bacteria and stuff. And I'm making a wet mixture with that. And I'm getting my pan really hot right here. And I'm going to pour this in. And what I'm expecting it to be is like injera, like the bread that you use in Ethiopian food. Now that would be made with teff, which is a little different than what we're using here. But it would otherwise would be sort of a similar thing. It would be like sitting around with a lot of bacteria and working and stuff. So I'm just waiting for this to get hot enough. It's just about there, almost there. And then we're going to pour that in and make a little hand bread. So it's going to be entirely edible, super nutritious. We'll see how it tastes. Yeah, what do you think, Bonnie? You think it's going to be yummy or no? Maybe, we'll see. All right, so I think this is just about getting up to the temperature. Can you see in there? Because it's going to be sort of fun to watch this. All right, so it's sort of going to be like a big floppy pancake bread is the idea. So let's see what happens. A lot of the very early breads were probably people experimenting with wheat and water and leaving it out. And what I'm expecting to happen is these bubbles to start coming up, which I'm seeing them form, which is good. So you can see I'm less interested in that big bubble. I'm more looking at these smaller ones. And these bubbles are all going to be coming from the bacteria that's just been eating away at this wheat. And this is going to be a bread that's going to be very sour tasting. It's going to be very flexible, and it should taste really great with fatty foods. So we're almost to a place where it's cooked now. And I'm going to get a spatula to get under there. I think that one's the one I'm going to do it. This is my grandma's spatula. It's my prized favorite spatula of all. We're going to see how sticky this stuff is. And it's a little bit on the sticky side. This is a really well-seasoned pan too, so this is sticky right now. It has to do with my technique or the dough I'm making. Alright, so the first one of these might be a little bit of a bust. It's also possible I may have rushed it and not had the pan hot enough. What I'm going to do is take that out of there. I'm going to scrape out all those pieces. And I'm going to run headlong into another experiment, see how this one works. So we're getting that pan hot again. What do you think, Violet? You think it's going to work this time?
Don't know.
Don't know. It's an interesting experiment. We'll see what happens. All right, let that go. And meanwhile, we're gonna take a quick peek in here, see how our soda breads are doing. So this top soda bread is spreading out a little bit. The bottom one's probably looking a lot different. This was the one that we're using a different method with. But they're cooking along nicely. It's a high temperature. I'm cooking these at 450 right now. And so this is, especially in the Dutch oven, this is something that might have been done over a hearth or something like that. So we're simulating that cooking style. I'm just gonna check in on my potato soup, which is looking really yummy right now. It's not done yet. I want these potatoes to break down further, but you can see that it's starting to develop a little bit more texture in the broth in the background. What do you think of this? You taking a taste of it? Sour? Mm-hmm. It is, huh? It's pretty yummy though, isn't it? You don't think so? It's not to your taste?
It's very sour.
Alright, I'll tell Richard. I'll say, Violet's not sure about this stuff. I'm seeing if this next one's going to come out any better. I think it might. You're not sure about it?
Yeah.
It's sticking a lot too. Well, that part didn't stick. Some of it's sticking, some of it's not. But overall, it's still sticking to the pan a lot, isn't it?
Yeah. Very sour.
Maybe it just needs to cook a little longer. All right. So we'll see how that works out. I'm gonna just give that one to the compost. And you know, we're gonna have a very beautiful bread today coming out with that soda bread. But it's fun to try out some new things too. And while you guys are stuck at home, I would encourage everybody to play a little bit in the kitchen. I think a lot of people played around and made concoctions and stuff when they were kids, and you might have gotten yelled at for doing it. But I think it can be a lot of fun to play through. You might discover some fun new things. Try not to waste too much, but you should have fun in the kitchen. I'm going to take a moment and just talk a little bit about these recipes or break them down for you. So we've had a couple episodes where I've talked about the structure of a recipe. I'm going to do that again right here, sort of how you can think about this, how you might think about substitutes or other things that you might do with a recipe. Let's start out with the soda bread. So in this case, we have 3 cups of soft wheat, and then we have 1 cup of all-purpose flour. So this is the flour component. And down here we've got the buttermilk, and we've got 2 cups of buttermilk. Down here we have the fruit. And this right here is the leavener. So, and we have some salt. So basically you have some flour, you have some liquid, you have the fruit, and you have some salt and some baking soda. And so what you may end up doing is you may end up doing a recipe where you play around with what's in this bucket. You know, maybe you don't have the soft flour and you use 4 cups of all-purpose flour, that'd be fine. Or maybe you use 2 cups of whole wheat flour and 2 cups of all-purpose flour. All those things are fine. Generally, the more whole wheat you use, the more moisture you're going to want to use, so you might tick up the amount of moisture a little bit. And the more your flour is like all-purpose flour, the less moisture you might use, so you might bring that down a little bit. But you could play around with what's in this. You may put some rye flour in there. That would be okay too. So you can play around with what you have. The leavener, the ratio you're interested in here is between the flour and the liquid. And that's where if you did 2 cups of the flour, you'd need to go down to 2 cups of the liquid. The next thing to think about is the leavener here. And we're using the baking soda to make things lift. So you can use buttermilk to do that. 2 cups of buttermilk, the sourness in the buttermilk will react with the baking soda. Back in the 1800s, it would have been soured milk because people would have sour milk at home. Before milk was pasteurized, it would sour very slowly in the refrigerator. It wouldn't become that really foul smell. Right now, if our milk's gone sour, you don't want to get anywhere near it. But what sour milk used to be was something totally different. The reason our sour milk smells so bad is it's been pasteurized all the way, so there's no bacteria in there. And then when one bacteria gets in there and it multiplies, it smells awful. But what milk used to be was loaded with lots of different bacteria, and when they would start to grow and sour the milk, they would all grow in population many varieties, and they would keep one another down, and you wouldn't have a runaway population. So I'm just going to check on this guy. Yeah. Is not your favorite? Is that what you're making the face about? Don't worry, I won't make you eat it. It's an experiment. We're going to taste it later. So people would use sour milk, and the sour milk would have sourness coming from bacteria that would react with the baking soda to create the bubbles. And in our case, we didn't even have buttermilk, so we put a little bit of vinegar, and the acid in the vinegar is reacting with the alkaline baking soda and creating the bubbles. But you could play around with this. If you have baking powder instead of baking soda, there's a ratio you could change that out at, and you wouldn't want as much sourness in it. Like we did. We didn't have buttermilk, so we used milk with vinegar. If you are vegan and you don't want to use milk, you could use soy milk or something like that. It would be okay in this recipe. You would want to bring in the vinegar in a similar way that we did with the milk. And then in terms of the fruit, if I didn't have raisins, I could use apricots, or I could use dried cherries or something else. And I probably want to use them in a similar proportion to what I have here. So there's a way we can step back and look at the recipe and think about this in terms of its chunks. One chunk here is the flour, one chunk here is the milk or the liquid, one chunk is the leavener, and then another chunk here is the sweets or in this case, the raisins. And you can play around with those ratios and try out all different things. Let's look at the potato soup recipe in a similar way. So when we teach people how to make soups at Clover, we talk about the onion stage, and there's a lot of different things that fit into that allium family. You've got onions, and you also have garlic and leeks, and you also have shallots, and you also have green onions and scallions, and you have chives like we're using today. So there's a lot of different things that fall into that onion and garlic family, and you can substitute them. They're all going to taste a little different. It's not like they all taste identical, but they're going to play a similar role in the soup. So if I didn't have onions but I had leeks, I could put leeks in here. If I didn't have leeks but I have onions, I could use, if I didn't have leeks but I have chives, I could use chives, which is what we're doing today. Most of these onions are going to go in early. The onion is the most hardy. After that would be the garlic, so you don't want to put the garlic until after the onion. And then the chives are going to be the most delicate. In our case, we're actually going to put those in toward the very end of the soup, which is going to be really yummy. Going to just check on our soup. I'm going to add a little bit more water to that. I just started here. Here it was getting down a little bit too much. Oh, I'm running out. All my water's by. You want to fill up a little water, sweetie?
Sure.
All right. And I won't talk too much longer, but I want to finish talking a little bit about this recipe and how to think about it. Another chunk you have in this recipe is the thyme and bay leaf. In our case today, we didn't have thyme, so we substituted Greek oregano, which is pretty similar in the same family as thyme. But if you didn't have this herb, you could try something else. The soup is going to taste a little bit different, but again, it's going to play a similar role. It's not going to throw it off altogether. I've done all different things with potato soups. I've made them even with sage, and it's been really yummy. So you can play around with different herbs here and realize you're going to have like a different result, but it's going to play a similar role. Another chunk here is the potatoes, and we used all the same kind of potato, and they're a white potato today. This might even tell us what variety of potato these are. It just says certified organic potato, so unfortunately it doesn't say. They look sort of like a variant of a Yukon Gold, but I'm not sure exactly what kind they are. But they're sort of a golden potato. Yeah, I don't think it says anywhere on there. But if you had red potatoes, you could use those. You could use a mixture of potatoes, that would be fine. They're all going to cook a little differently, but they're going to play the same role. We have some kale, and that's just an added thing which isn't necessary for this. And then we have some seasoning, salt and vinegar and pepper that we're going to do at the end. But again, we can think of this in terms of the onion stage, we can think of what herbs we're bringing to it, and the potatoes. And these are the core pieces that are going to get us to a potato soup. And we can play around within that if we don't have all the exact ingredients at home. It's okay. Did you give me some water there, Vi?
Yep.
Awesome. That'd be great. Thank you, sweetie. So I'm just adding more water there because I was starting to hear it boiling. down a little bit. And that's probably still going to need, you can look at these potatoes, they're getting softer, but they haven't broken down to the extent I would like. So I'll probably bring it back to a boil, give it another 15 minutes, and we'll have a really beautiful potato soup. In the meantime, let's look at this bread. You know, we have a little bit of bubbles coming up in it, but it's not what I would have hoped, and it is sort of gummy. So I wouldn't say I'm super happy with this. I mean, I guess it's edible, but I'm not sure I would make this a lot. It came out so you can see my expression on my face.
Is it a sour sauce?
I don't know if it's what I would make often. What do you think? It's not your favorite either. It's very sour, and I don't think the texture's too great. It's a sort of gummy, isn't it? Yeah. It's not going to hurt you, but I would say that one's not one I would make another time. Let's take a look at the soda bread. All right, so we can see the soda bread's cooking up really nicely there. You can see it's going to be beautiful. It's not ready yet, but it's starting to cook up very nicely. Put that back in. This is the other soda bread. This is the experimental one. Now, when the soda bread's done, I'll pull this out for a second. When I knock it, you hear it starting to sound hollow, like a drum, but it's not all the way there. And when this bread's done, it'll sound sort of more hollow than it does right now. It's a little bit hollow, but not all the way. So this needs a little bit more cooking. So I think now we'll answer a few questions, and we may end up having to do one of these shows where I check back in later and post a little show, a little clip afterwards showing you what things should look like when they're all the way done, because I don't think either of these was quite at that stage yet. Let's take some questions though. Do you want to read those off to me?
Sure. Let's see.
You don't finding any? I think you may be right. Somebody asked if I preheat the Dutch oven before putting it in. I did not. For a lot of bread you would. So if we were trying to make a real crusty French bread or sourdough, I definitely would be preheating it. For this bread, I'm not preheating it. I'm just putting it right in. It's just a little bit of a different technique, and it's going to work well for this bread. But like I said, we're doing this. You can do it without the Dutch oven too. We're doing this in 2 different ways, and we'll get to see both results. If anybody has other questions, let us know what they are. In the meantime, I'm going to cut up some of these chives. All right, and add these into the soup. And I cut these a little bit larger. I think they'll bring a nice texture and flavor. They'll make them a little more robust. So if we were just garnishing the soup, I may have made those much more fine. And now I'm going to chop up some parsley. Again, this is a little more on the delicate side, so I didn't add this in at the beginning. We're at the point now where there's not a lot of cooking left to do in the soup. So I think we can add this in, and its flavors will mix in there with everything else, but it won't get pulverized or gray or something like that. What I'm doing with the parsley is I'm just pulling off the tough stems. Those aren't going to be very enjoyable to eat. So. If I were doing something, if I were blending or pureeing the soup, I'd probably leave those stems in there, but I'm not doing any of those things. Now, the next thing I'm doing here is, you can see, I'm folding it in on itself, making a little herb ball, and that's going to let me, I'm going to do a nice claw, so I'm not putting my fingertips in harm's way, and it's going to let me come down and I'm letting it come through the tip of the knife and fanning over the herbs there. Okay. All right. And now the last thing we're going to add in at this point is the kale. And then with this kale, if it looks a little wilted to you, it's because it is. So it's not bad, but it's not super fresh kale because it's been sitting in our fridge for a little while, probably since the shutdown. But this is a great use for it. I mean, it still tastes fine. There's nothing wrong with it, and it's going to be really nice in the soup. And I'm going to pick through it and make sure so right there's a little bit of a bad spot. So I'm just going to pull that off, and I'm not going to add that in. And let's see. You want to pick through that one, Violet? Thank you, sweetie. You're being such a good helper on the potato soup. Oh, you love potato soup, don't you? One of Violet's favorite things in the world, potatoes, and I hadn't put two and two together until just now. But you're always helping, right? Oh, I can see the flower petals falling off our tree with the wind. I think we're like just gonna lose some of those flowers. All right, so I'm gonna do a similar thing with this as to what I did with the herb, just twisting it around. It's pretty hardy stuff. I'm not gonna hurt it. And again, I'm going to come down and going slowly to show you what I'm doing. I'm cutting pretty thin strips of this kale. And if I'm methodical about that, it means that all the pieces of kale I have now are all about the same width, which is pretty narrow. And let's go ahead and use a scraper to transport that over to our soup. And this would be a delicious soup without kale added to it, but since I had it in the fridge, I thought it would be really yummy, and it's a nice use for it. And it was sort of on its last legs, and it wasn't a ton of kale either. So this is looking really nice to me. So we've got potatoes in there, we have some herbs in there, we've got the kale and the chives in there. We gotta let this cook a little bit further. I'll show you what I'm looking for now. If I pick up a potato, I'm looking for these to start to split and break a little bit. And you can see putting some pressure against the side, and it will break. It's cooked, but it hasn't broken down quite as much as I want. So I'm going to let this go a little bit longer, and it's going to become a little bit more stewy. Do you guys have a question there, or are you just checking it out? Shoot.
Any suggestions for what to have on hand by then, in case we go up to the store?
Say again, what to have on hand in case
We're
what?
all excited about bread.
Yes.
Any suggestions?
Bread. Well,
Any suggestions for what to do, what to have on hand by
For
then
bread.
in case we go into the store?
yes. Awesome question. So, we're going to get going on bread. If you have flour, that'd be great. We'll work with lots of different kinds of flour. If you can buy flour from a New England purveyor, that'd be awesome. I've got an example right here. This is some flour from Maine Grains. You can order online from Maine Grains, and they have some really beautiful fresh wheat. So you don't need a grinder like mine at home. You can buy it already ground. So this is already ground flour. There's another person in Massachusetts. It's a company called One Mighty Mill, and they also sell fresh wheat. And some of theirs is distributed in grocery stores too. So those are really good options. You're going to want some white flour as well. If you're going to a grocery store, you might look and see if they have bread flour. If they don't, you can just get regular all-purpose flour. If you can get your hands on some yeast, that would be awesome. Although we're going to make some naturally leavened sourdough bread. I can show you one more thing, so there's some curiosity about this. So this looks like a little bit of a mess here, but again, sort of some of the experiments I'm working on with Richard, he was saying, you could just let this yeast dry out. And, this becomes something much more similar to what baker's yeast is, which comes in these blocks. So this has just been sitting in my kitchen, and I've let it just dry out naturally. And this is, again, probably 3-4 weeks old. And what's amazing is I was just playing around this the other day. If you take like a golf ball size piece of this stuff, and you put this in a jar with some water and some fresh flour, and you wait overnight, it'll be bubbling all over the place. So you can basically refresh it. And we were even playing with taking some of this and blending it into flour, and then starting out with that for a bread. So you have some like pre-inoculated flour. When you blend this into the flour, the whole thing's dry and shelf stable, and then you can add water to it and get going from there. So this is part of the bread experimentation. We'll get more into different techniques and how to play around with breads at home. I think I share Richard's idea that it's nice to get away from the sort of cult of the bread starter. I think that it's intimidating. I think it's a little bit of a fetish. And I think that we can make really beautiful breads without being worried about keeping some starter alive. And I also think we can make really great bread without wasting flour, because a lot of times when people are feeding their starter, they're throwing out some of the dough. So we're gonna play around with some methods that are going to use sourdough, but are not going to have a starter that you keep feeding every day. All right, let's check on the breads. I think we're probably pretty close to being done with those breads. I think they've been in there about a half hour. This would usually be about 35 minutes or so, 35, 40 minutes. And I'm reaching in here to grab a cooling rack. And I want something to put the bread on. I'm going to pull it out. And so this is the first bread. Well, it's the second one we made, but it's the first one I'm going to pull out. And I don't know if you can hear that. It's sort of like a drum sound, like a hollow sound. It doesn't sound like a thud. It sounds like a bit of a drum. And that's going to help me know that this is it's cooked. Okay? So that's the one. This is the experiment that was made with this is the experiments made with that sour starter, and we didn't put any milk in this at all. So this one's vegan. Let's take a look at the other bread. The other bread might need a little bit more time, but let's see where it is right now. Okay, so this is really beautiful. I'm super happy with it. It's not finished being cooked yet, so you can see even it's not like a drum. And you can even see it moving a little when I touch it. So I'm just sort of showing you how I can tell if something's cooked all the way or not. That's going to need to continue on for a little while, which is great. And so we'll let it keep cooking in there. And we'll let the soup go a little longer. But I'll take a moment to show you how I'm going to season the soup. So the things I'm going to use to do that will be salt, pepper, and I'm going to use a little bit of vinegar. I might as well use our cider vinegar. I think that'll taste really good. I'm getting myself some spoons, and so I'm going to start out with tasting the broth. And now it's very mild. But really yummy. It's like sweet. It's got really good flavor developing in there. I'm really happy. It's going to be a yummy soup for us all. I'm going to start out with about a half a teaspoon of salt. Let's make it a full teaspoon of salt. And I'm going to stop there. So what I'm hoping is that the salt I just added is enough to start bringing some flavors forward and making them more bright, but not so much salt that when I taste this, it's going to taste like salt. If I taste this and it tastes like salt, I've overdone it. And so I want to go easily up to that line. I don't want to jump right over that. I want to sort of step up to it slowly. So, it's really, really good. Now, before I add any more salt, I'm going to add a little vinegar. And you might wonder why I'm adding vinegar to this soup. I'm not going to add much. Again, I don't want it to taste like vinegar at all. But a little bit of acid is going to make the flavor come forth. I'm also going to add a little bit of ground pepper. Not a lot. And I'm going to take a taste. And we may even use one more ingredient, which is sugar, which sounds really funny. We wouldn't want to make it taste sweet again, but it might help us adjust the finishing of the soup and get it to a really nice spot. So let's taste this now. It's tasting really, really yummy to me. And I do think I'll add just like a teeny bit of sugar. So I'm probably adding like half a teaspoon, not very much at all. And these steps, what I'm doing right now, this can take a soup from tasting okay to tasting very memorable and really, really delicious. And this is something we do at our restaurant. Each restaurant, each day, we'll make the soups. up from scratch. And the people that are making the soups, they follow a recipe up until this point, and then they get to a place and they have to step it up again to that line and make sure it's seasoned just right. Try this again. It's really, really good. So now, like, what I'm trying to get to is like, I want another bite right away. The closer I get to that spot where like I want to keep eating it, the closer it is to what I'm trying to make. And this one, it tastes really yummy. I want another bite right away. So I'm really happy with where it is. And you can see these potatoes are getting to a place where I'd say I want to go another 5 or 10 minutes with this. So I think the soup probably cooks a little longer than I was originally expecting. I was thinking it was about 30 minutes, but I think it's probably going to be more like 45, 50 minutes by the time it's done. You can start to see some of these irregular shapes in the potatoes. That's part of what I'm aiming at. I want these to start breaking down. You see how they're getting softer on the edges. When I first cut them up, if you remember at the beginning of the show, they were all a similar size, and now they're starting to break up into pieces. They're still there, but they're starting to break up, and some of what they've left behind is in that liquid. And that's exactly what I want to get to. I'm really happy with how that's turning out. So what we'll do is we'll get a photograph at least, and maybe even a little video of this when it's all finished. And that bread's got to cool, this other one's got to come out of the oven. So we'll gather that up and we'll post that so everybody can see that at the end. But when you're cooking the bread, you really want to pay attention to that sound that you hear when you're knocking it, because your oven might cook a little differently than mine. So the perfect amount of time in my oven might be 42 minutes, and the perfect amount of time in yours might be 55 minutes. So knowing how to judge it and how to get it to the right spot is really important. You want to say anything else? Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll be back again tomorrow. Thanks so much. Bye.